So in making the push to try to get out the black vote, Jim Crow Joe made an appearance on the Ricky Smiley Morning Show, which is a syndicated morning show that plays on black radio stations across the country. Yeah. So I want you guys to listen to Joe Biden, Joseph Robinette, get on the FCC airwaves and start beating his chest about all the things that he's done for black people. I'm sorry, that he's done for black people or to black people. Okay, he said for black people. I'm gonna get into what he has done to black people after we check out this clip. This is just about 2 minutes and some change. And I know Joe Biden's voice rings out like fingernails on a chalkboard, but please indulge me if you could for a moment and listen to what Jim Crow say that he has done for the blacks.
It's always a great time when you come on the show. The last time we spoke during your campaign for president, and you committed to making good on promises that are top priorities for, especially for black folks, people in the black community, like student loan debt, nominating the first black woman to the United States Supreme Court, and marijuana reform. Now that we're nearly 2 years into your, presidency, what have you done to improve the lives of African Americans?
Well, I hope I've improved the lives of African Americans like I said I would do. For example, too many African Americans were denied everything from Pell Grants, student loans, housing, et cetera, because they were arrested for possession of marijuana. Too many. All whites as well. So anybody who was ever arrested just for the possession of marijuana, their record is expunged. They don't have to listen anymore, and it's going to free up a lot of opportunities. I've also made sure that we're going to provide for student debt relief. You have 70% of African Americans receive Pell Grants, and what I've done, I've forgiven loans of $10,000 for every eligible borrower, and an additional 10 if you had a Pell Grant. And those historic resources support. I've also put in $6 billion for HBCUs for a simple reason. The students at black universities are extremely qualified as anybody at any other university, but because they don't have great endowments, they don't have these significant laboratories that teach the technical things that they need to be taught. And so this allows these universities to build these facilities so that now you graduate and you have the same training as you went to Harvard or you went to any other state university. And in addition to that, I kept my commitment, and I'm really excited about the fact we have the first black Supreme Court justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and she is really something else. You're going to be really pleased with her. I've appointed more female black Americans to the courts, to the federal bench than I can believe every other president combined. And so, look, there's a lot. And by the way, we now have a national holiday because I made sure that we're going to deal with what we said we were going to deal with. But the things that I think make the biggest difference, Ricky, that people haven't noticed, is not obvious, is, for example, on COVID vaccinations, I made sure that we went exactly where the black community is, so they weren't left behind. And so the number of percentage of African Americans receiving their COVID shots is as high, in some cases higher, than all other Americans, because I didn't want them being left behind. We went to their communities to make sure that the docs were available to give them what they needed. And so, with police, we restricted federally chokeholds and signed executive orders on no-knock warrants, but I still support funding the police. But we should be funding the police, particularly in black communities where we have more social workers. We have more people doing the kinds of things that are equipped the law enforcement to deal with things other than by pure force. And we have to hold cops accountable. But we need police officers. I'm not a defund the cops guy, but I am fund them and give them assistance that they need. Retrain them as to how they, in fact, are trained. That's all. I've provided the money to do that. So there's a lot going on And I feel really, quite frankly, good that, you know,
Yes,
and we're
sir.
replacing every lead pipe in America, ensuring everyone across this whole country has good drinking water on the shores of South Carolina. Anyway, and
Right.
but so there's just a lot going on. I'm probably talking too much. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. You pretty much answering all of my questions because everything that you're saying was questions that I was going to ask.
In the interest of fairness, I did not listen to the entire interview, so I'm not going to just assume that Ricky Smiley didn't push back on any of that bullshit. But part of me very much wants to assume that Ricky Smiley did not push back on any of that bullshit, because in order to get interviews like Joe Biden, you have to be able to accept the bullshit. You can't challenge the president on his bullshit, on his very obvious lies. And, you know, people want access to the president. You see, that's why they would never let me interview Joe Biden, because I'd be like, nope, sir, let's run it down, because he just gave us a bunch of bullshit that Joe Biden says that he has done for Black people. And let me preface this by saying some of the things that he has proposed, or that he claims that he has offered solution for, to problems affecting the Black community are things that he himself helped enact against the Black community. For him to talk about marijuana, let's start there, about this very paltry marijuana reform, which is not even actually reform, because the Biden administration has failed to reschedule marijuana. And some people will be like, well, give him a chance. Okay, well, we gave Obama a chance. Obama had 8 whole years to reschedule marijuana. And I believe that the president can do that through executive action. I disagree with Speaker Pelosi. And I know y'all be like, well, she's the speaker. She knows. I don't know what the fuck she knows. Okay. Like, I really don't know what the fuck she knows. I disagree with Speaker Pelosi that this has to be a congressional action. I believe that because the DEA is under the purview of the president, marijuana can be rescheduled via executive action, but we can have that debate at another time. But again, for Joe Biden to tout the expungement of only so far 6,500 people who were federally charged with simple possession of marijuana is a fucking joke. And they'll say, oh, well, it's thousands more in DC. When we're talking about literally thousands as it pertains to marijuana arrests and convictions, and the amount of people walking around in this country with the marijuana possession on their record, we're talking about millions of people. So for only several thousand to be included in the marijuana reform, that's not fucking reform, okay? That's giving somebody who has a broken leg a goddamn Band-Aid. Does that help the broken leg? Does it really do anything? Absolutely not. So, and let's pull up that ACLU report really quick, just to sort of hammer the thing home a little harder here about the marijuana, because the ACLU, to their credit, they have done a couple of very unprecedented reports about the ways that marijuana and the war on marijuana specifically is handled in this country differently from white folks to Black folks. And their 2012 report, I think it was called The War on Marijuana in Black and White. Yep, that was it. 2012. It was revealing, okay? Because roughly Black people arrested for marijuana, despite using weed at the same rates as white folks, Black people are arrested at least 3 times as much. And that depends on where you are. In the nation's capital, DC, right next door to me, formerly known as Chocolate City, residents in the district, Black residents, were 7-8 times more likely to get arrested for marijuana before some actual marijuana reform came to the city via a progressive city council at the time. But just a couple of key findings, let's take away from this most recent report. A tale of 2 countries, okay, when it comes to marijuana. So some of their findings include the war on marijuana continues to rage on. Marijuana arrests are still widespread across the U.S., despite several states having decriminalized and outright legalized. Extreme racial disparities in marijuana possession arrests, they persist throughout the country and have not improved since 2010. Marijuana arrests decreased after legalization or decriminalization, which is a good thing, but racial disparities in America persist even in states that legalized or decriminalized marijuana. And I will give you guys a District of Columbia. I submit Washington, D.C. as evidence of that. The city council and the city decriminalized marijuana, made marijuana available medicinally, and the recreational sale part is still in a bit of a gray area because anyway, long story short, despite the fact that weed is legalized in DC, you can still receive a ticket. You can still receive a citation for reasons. If you have more than the prescribed amount or whatever, if you're not smoking in a non-federal area. Come to find out that the neighborhoods east of the river, wards 7 and 8, which are predominantly the few remaining Black places in Washington, D.C., you never guess where the majority of the weed citations are written. If you guessed in the Black areas, you would be right. It's funny how that works. It's funny how that works. So that's Biden talking what he's done for marijuana. Nothing, because he still has a lot of room to go. The next thing that he said, he talked about funding for HBCUs. And I had to do a little bit of research on that because that to me was very significant. HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, have been chronically underfunded from both at the federal level and at the state level, okay? To the point that some HBCUs are literally owed hundreds of thousands of dollars from lack of critical funding. And in the Build Back Better bill, the $1.5 trillion that Biden was able to get passed, initially, he had promised billions for HBCUs. That number actually came out to be about $885 million is what he's actually got. I'm not sure what $6 billion number he's referring to in the Ricky Smiley piece that we just heard. But regardless, it's a massive step down from what was originally promised and owed to historically Black colleges and universities. And maybe some of those HBCUs would have bigger endowments if Joe Biden didn't spend his senatorial career for 30 years passing laws and legislation that locked up Black folks who could have potentially went to college, but instead of going to college, they had small amounts of marijuana on them, and Joe Biden sent them to jail. Thanks, Joe. At all. Yes. So the part about funding the police, I think, is extremely critical because according to the polls for this upcoming midterm election, right? I was watching Meet the Press and Chuck Todd did his data download. Anyway, so one of the things that he referenced was the enthusiasm gap amongst Black voters during this midterm election season. And I think that's pretty critical because what the Democrats are not going to put together, they are not going to be able to draw this very direct straight line. It's part of the reason. A couple reasons. There's actually a few, but I'm going to highlight two quick ones. One reason why Black people are not coming out for Joe Biden is because Joe Biden owes us fucking money. And not just us, he owes you fucking money too. Do you guys not remember when he was in Georgia 2020 campaigning on the stump for Warnock and Ossoff? He was promising $2,000 in stimulus money. And then he got elected and he said, did I say 2,000? I meant to say 1,400. And let me tell you something, y'all. I'm not a rich person. So if somebody owes me money, I'm not going to forget that they owe me money. Okay. Now, I'm not an economist, but I understand that 1,400 is less than 2,000. And that leaves a difference of $600. And I ain't forgot, me personally, and I'm sure lots of other people have not forgotten that Joe Biden still owes us $600 fucking dollars. $600. Okay. Run me my money. And if you think, I don't care how it polls, I assure you that is still on the minds of some voters. This motherfucker said he was going to give us $2,000. He only ran us $1,400. Joe Biden still owes me $600. Run me my money. Okay, there's that. And the other thing he talked about in the Ricky Smiley interview, he talked about funding the police. And I'm so glad that he mentioned that. I'm so glad that Joe Biden needs to remind us that he is not against funding the police. He does not support defunding the police. And I want him and the rest of the Democratic pundits and strategists to remember he said exactly fucking that when Black people, and especially young Black people, fail to show up at the polls for Democratic candidates. Because you guys, kind of circling back to what we're talking about at the top of the show with this, delusion of democracy. Like, you cannot fund a literal occupying force in the communities, in non-white communities, and expect people to be grateful for the shit. Because I have seen police be funded to the freaking hilt in departments across this country, right? And yet the so-called crime rate doesn't seem to go down. Isn't that funny how that works? And you heard Joe Biden even say in that interview, you know, we funded the police, and then he sort of garbled it a bit in something unintelligible and talked about social workers. Well, I didn't hear you say you funded social workers. I heard you say you funded the police, right? So you're not really doing anything to address some of the reasons that end up with negative police encounters, particularly in non-white communities and Black and brown communities, where even the example of people experiencing mental health crisis, police are 3 times more likely to murder Black folks who are experiencing a mental health crisis. This is why on my show, and I'll do this here, I implore you, please, specifically a non-white person, but definitely a Black person, if you ever see a Black person having a mental health crisis, do not call the police on them, because chances are you will be summoning their executioner. Do you understand what I'm saying? The police do not show up to help. They show up to stop the situation, and they will do that force. They will do that by any means necessary. And they are not sympathetic to Black people who are acting out. Okay. So please, as a public safety and service announcement, don't ever call the police on a Black person who is definitely having a mental health crisis, because chances are at the hands of the cops. So Joe Biden admits that he doesn't fund mental health services, but he funds the police. And as we find ourselves in ridiculously difficult and challenging economic times, I find it very strange that Joe Biden would thump his chest about what he's done for Black people when literally he's done little to nothing. He's offered basically crumbs. And most notably, the federal minimum wage has not gone up. I haven't even heard. Are they even talking about that in Congress? Like, has that come up? Has it come up for a vote? Has it even been presented? Is there any sort of plan to move forward to elevate the wages of the lowest earning Americans? No. Oh, they just got to be in poverty? Oh, okay, got it. Thanks, Joe. You're doing great.